Welcome to the Explore Words, Discover Worlds podcast, presented by Bradford Literature Festival. In this episode, we spotlight the story of Alaa Abd el-Fattah, a high-profile political prisoner in Egypt. His book, You Have Not Yet Been Defeated, is a unique account from the front line of a decade of global upheaval. Recorded live at the 2023 Bradford Literature Festival, this episode explores the courage of political prisoners like Alaa Abd el-Fattah, who lose their freedom for speaking out against authoritarian regimes.
Thank you very much. So before I introduce my panel here today, I'd like to introduce the person who really should be sitting here right now, which is Alaa Abd el-Fattah. Alaa Abd el-Fattah is often described as the Middle East's most high-profile political prisoner, playing a leading role in the 2011 revolution that toppled Egypt's long-term autocrat Hosni Mubarak. Alaa has spent most of the past decade behind bars. Last year, the British-Egyptian activist rose to prominence once again as he staged a hunger strike while the Egyptian government of Abdel Fattah el-Sisi hosted the COP27 climate conference in Sharm el-Sheikh. Sadly, despite worldwide support for his cause, he remains in Tora prison. In 2021, a collection of his writings, You Have Not Been Defeated, was published to critical acclaim. Including essays, tweets, and writings smuggled out of prison, it's a mosaic of work that gives a unique insight to Egypt's turbulent decade and Alaa himself. With me today is Leila Swaif. Leila is an assistant professor of mathematics at Cairo University and a lifelong advocate of human rights and academic freedom. She was one of the founders of the March 9th movement for the university autonomy in Egypt, a group that was active in defending academic freedom and the independence of universities, which played a key role in paving the way for the 2011 revolution. She is Alaa's mother and part of a family of renowned human rights activists. And Kamala Shamsi. Kamala was born and grew up in Karachi, Pakistan. She's the author of 8 novels, including Home Fire, which won the Women's Prize for Fiction in 2018. Kamala's work has been translated into over 30 languages. She's a fellow of the Royal Society of Literature and professor of creative writing at the University of Manchester. Her latest novel, Best of Friends, has been described as an epic story that explores the ties of childhood friendship, as well as a work that explores the way the political world intrudes into the personal, a subject that I think we'll be certainly discussing today. Leila, before we go anywhere, I'd like you to tell us a bit more about Alaa as a person before prison.
Well, I had a heads up that I would have to answer a question like that. So I thought about it a lot. Parts of glimpses of Alaa before prison you can see in the book. There is an article, a full article, portrait of the activist out of prison. And it talks about how Alaa was when he was a blogger and when he was advocating free software and when he was trying to make IT friendly to different languages, Arabic and African languages and so on. All the causes that he espoused and that were all about sort of enabling people in different cultures to express themselves and to be connected. There is also a passage, I'm going to ask Camilla to read it, which takes us back to Alaa as a teenager. It's a passage in one of his best-known articles, Graffiti for Two.
Should I? We drink tea in the courtyard. We've passed the stage of discussing the use of our resilience, the chances of our release. After a month of disclosures and revisions, all that's left to us is memories. And while we tell stories of past imprisonments when the cells seemed more friendly and comrades more loyal, even though the revolution was then an impossible dream, I think back and find myself there, in the past, in the metro, with a friend, in my high school uniform, handing out an investigative report complete with photographs of the torture of an old cattle thief they set alight with kerosene in Fayoum police station. We change trains quickly before someone recovers from the shock of the image and arrests us. I didn't tell my father I had come into my inheritance that day. It didn't seem important. We were just trying to get rid of some of the anger, to get that terrible photograph out of the house. Hope had no part in this.
That's Alaa as a teenager. Now I would indulge myself by telling you an anecdote about Alaa as a child. In her foreword to the book, Naomi Klein remarks on Alaa's precision of language. This anecdote concerns that. When he was like 6 or 7, Alaa asked me, Mommy, why did God create the world? Well, I started telling him how the world came in, I mean, how the solar system and so on came into being, and how Earth came into being. And he said, no, Mommy, that's not what I asked. I didn't ask how, I asked why. So that's Alaa at 7.
And how is he now? I want to know.
Okay, now, well, conditions are, a year ago he was transferred from Torah high security prison to Wadi Natron. Wadi Natron is really much milder. It's still, okay, it's still imprisonment, and it's, I call it, we've moved from the repression of the Middle Ages to the repression of the 21st century. You have 24, in Wadi Natron you don't have officers beating you up or stuff like that, or trying. They hardly beat Alaa Abd because we always make a big fuss, but anyway. But you do have 24-hour camera surveillance. You do not have any direct contact with the guards. You talk to them through intercoms so that everything is recorded. You only have direct contact with the prisoners who share your cell. And in Alaa's case, that's only 2 prisoners. And the prisoners who share your exercise time, and in Alaa's case, that's only 8 prisoners. So all in all, he has contact with 10 people. And other than that, he has no direct contact, except on family visits. And again, on family visits, it's behind the glass screen, and we have to talk through a phone. So everything is monitored and recorded. And I can't touch him. I mean, I haven't touched Alaa since he was in court a year and a half ago. So that's, but still, compared to the nightmare that was Torah, these are good conditions, because he sleeps on a proper mattress. He is allowed books. He is allowed a television screen, although what he can see on it is, of course, controlled. But he can watch sports events, and he can watch Egyptian drama, and he can watch cartoons. He can't watch news. He can't. He doesn't have a radio. He's not allowed the radio. Anything that gives him a chance to follow news is prohibited. So, we have to give him news in letters and stuff like that. And, he does these like jigsaw puzzles when he hears something, and when he sees مثلا people having a minute's silence for the dead in a sports event, then he asks, what was that? And, so he gets a general idea of what's happening from what we tell him and from what he sees. And from literary magazines, because طبعا he's off, but on a longer term basis than day-to-day news. He's okay. He's after he broke his, he was in very bad health. He almost died when he was on hunger strike. But now after he broke his hunger strike and started eating again, he's physically okay. I see him, the visits are once a month. Before COVID, the visits used to be 3 times a month. With COVID restrictions, they became once a month. Before COVID, the visits used to be an hour. With COVID restrictions, they became 20 minutes. Every single COVID restriction in Egypt has been lifted except the restrictions on visits to prisons. And finally, so I see him if I'm in Cairo, or one of my daughters sees him if I'm not, once a month, for 20 minutes behind the glass barrier. And we exchange letters once a week. I take letters and food and washed clothes and so on once a week to his prison, and we exchange letters once a week. And let me tell you that this is just about the best conditions for a political prisoner in Egypt. There are families who have not seen their sons, who have not visited their sons for 7, 8 years. There are, and who are not allowed letters at all, who are not, nothing. There are, so painful as Alaa's situation is, it's still just about the best situation for him. It became like that with a lot of pressure and demonstrating, and just to get to the place where we could get regular letters, it took demonstrations, and it took the arrest of Sanaa, and Sanaa being also put in prison
Sanaa
for
being your daughter.
Sanaa being my youngest daughter, Alaa's younger sister. We were sitting outside Torah prison because they were refusing to give us letters, and we were all beaten up. But later, Sanaa, when we went to the public prosecutor to make a complaint against being beaten up, Sanaa was kidnapped, and then she was arrested, and then she was tried for disseminating false news, and she was imprisoned for a year and a half, for 18 months. So, but in the end, we did we did establish the right to get a letter a week. But that was the price to pay for that.
Yeah. Alaa and Sanaa, when she was in prison, were one of 60 to 70,000 political prisoners in Egypt.
Yeah, that's the estimate. We don't know the numbers. Nobody knows. I mean, the number, it's not just that the numbers aren't published. I doubt that anybody in Egypt knows the numbers, even the public prosecutor, because there are prisoners in regular prisons, there are prisoners in police stations, there are people who are disappeared, and there are prisoners in illegal prisons, like police camps or stuff like that. And there are new prisons being built all the time. And for example, there's this police camp where they used to keep political prisoners. And then when we made a great fuss about this being an illegal prison, they turned it into, they put a sign and called it, I don't know, the Giza Central Prison or whatever, instead of the police camp number 10. So, so there's a whole, and it's very, and some are on remand, some are, have been sentenced, some are on trial. Those on remand are being placed on remand for different cases. So it's very difficult to get a proper figure. 60,000 is the best estimate we can make by the fact that every time the lawyers attend a hearing to look into remand arrests, the number who turn up in one court on one day is like 500.
Shocking. So I'd like to turn to You Have Not Yet Been Defeated, Alaa's book. And how much was he aware that this was being put together? I mean, I imagine he can't have had much input from prison.
Yeah, he was aware because we actually started this project in the 6 months when he was released, but was on probation from March 19 to September 19. He was released, but he was on probation. He had to spend the hours from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. in the police station, not at home. So that's when we had started this project just before he was released. So he was aware that we were going on with it. But actually, he was aware. The project was a book in Arabic. And then, the friends who were doing the English version, they sort of went ahead much faster than the friends who were doing the Arabic version. So it was the English version that came out first. When it was nearly done, we told him about it, and I told him about the title. I had chosen the title. I had suggested the title, and somebody had suggested something else, so I asked him to choose, and he chose this title.
Yeah, chose your one, that's good.
Yeah. So he was aware.
Which notably is, Daniel, you're making it sound more optimistic.
Yeah.
It's not you have not been defeated, it's you have not yet.
I thought I added the yet.
Not yet been defeated.
Yeah, and it's
sort of a warning note out there.
Yeah. And it's absolutely directed at the Western leader.
Yeah.
Because from Alaa's point of view, from our point of view, the Arab leader has been defeated.
Yeah. Carmela, you say that you know Alaa primarily through the book.
Only through the book.
Yeah. What struck you most when reading it?
He has the most extraordinary mind. And I mean, I just read it for the third time yesterday. And each time I read it, there are many levels of feelings of anger you can have, but one of my feelings of anger is I want this person out in the world every day writing and speaking to me about what's happening, because his analytical ability and the way, through the book, he's ranging from subject to subject. You see him as a student of history, and he's looking at South Africa and the sort of decades-long struggle that it takes South Africa to get to its own post-apartheid elections. You see him as a student of history, and then you see him as someone who partakes in but is also analyzing tech. And they're just these really incredibly smart interventions which were written sort of 8-10 years ago on social media. He's so smart on something like Uber. And the way he'll write about Uber and what the problem is in that model is quite different to the way other people are talking about it. I think it's so wonderful. Wonderful isn't the word. It's a relief to find someone who will talk head-on about defeat. In the way that so often you hear people saying, no, we must be optimistic, we must have hope. And there's something about saying, let us record this moment for what it is. And at other moments, he'll say, but of course, a revolution is a very, very long process. I'm talking about the battle. In the battle, there is defeat. But there are other points where he talks, and I think this is something that actually I've heard Julian Slover, whose parents were such important part of the anti-apartheid struggle, and I'd say, did they always think they could win? And she said, they always knew they had to be fighting. And it's something you hear him say, but it's not that you're fighting because you think you're going to win. You fight because there is a fight that needs to be fought. And what else are you going to do? And I think that kind of voice and the clarity with which he's speaking of those things are so significant. But he also, as that title says, he has so much to say to people in different parts of the world. There's part of me that is a Pakistani that is reading him as what it is to be in a country where the military has a certain kind of power and you feel defeat. But there's another kind of part of me that is reading him as a Brit, and that you have not yet been defeated, which is an extraordinary essay, and it is very much directed at the West, I think. And his first point, and when he says, when people say, what can I do? And his first point is defend your own democracy. And he's very eloquent on that, on how where you sit is where you can best fight. And that when the world's oldest democracies, when they start falling apart, that's a very bad precedent, because then other countries around the world can say, well, look, even they're doing this thing. And to be reading that in sort of, in Britain, I've read this between 2020 and now in the fever, and it just keeps feeling more and more true about a democracy under attack. I'm also, as a writer, he is such a beautiful, I want to read, there's a bit, also in terms of form, he ranges through so many, it's like at different moments he thinks, okay, this moment requires a tweet. This moment requires a collaboration with a poet. This moment requires an anecdote. This moment requires an essay written as a bit of dialogue. And there's this essay which is, it's called 5 Metaphors on Healing, is that the title? 5 Metaphors on Healing, which was written in 2019, 2 days before he was arrested. It is just the most extraordinary piece of writing. And I'm going to just read the last bit. If we are to be treated like animals with no agency, so be it. But we shall bypass cattle and livestock, ignore pets and domesticates. We shall look to the lizards, starfish and earthworms, those beings that can regenerate after an injury, no matter how grave. We shall accept that regenerated organs may not be identical to what was lost. They could appear to be mutilated, but look closer and you will see the beauty in monstrosity, for only the monstrous can hold both the history of dreams and hopes and the reality of defeat and pain together. The monstrous need not forget their old injuries in order to lose their fear of acquiring new ones.
Unbelievable writing.
Yeah.
The effects of governments targeting and imprisoning prisoners of conscience can be devastating for families, and I think particularly in the Arab world, like in Egypt, relatives are often added to a terror list, and that can mean they have travel bans, it means their property is confiscated, and other restrictions just for being associated, being a sort of, you don't even need to be an immediate relative often. How have you and your family managed to survive the past decade? And what sort of help or solidarity have you had from families in similar situations, both in Egypt and elsewhere?
Let's start with the solidarity bit. I have had a lot of solidarity. It's very difficult to say how much. I have been very lucky in the fact that my whole extended family has been very, very supportive. I know families who have had real problems with cousins or uncles or aunts or even parents, but we've been very lucky with that. We have a very, very supportive extended family. Also, other families are supportive. طبعا they're afraid. Some are afraid. Some are. Some start by being suspicious. How come they're so high profile? But eventually all this is overcome. When you keep meeting outside the same prison gates and standing in the same horrible queues, you queue outside these prisons for hours. You arrive like at 9 in the morning if you're lucky like me and you're coming from somewhere not too far and you've got a car. But there are people who arrive at 6 in the morning and they're traveling from, I don't know, other parts of Egypt and so on. And then you're stuck there for hours and hours and hours. So eventually a sort of community emerges. It has to emerge because you're spending all this time together and you're, giving, because also there are no proper channels for news. There are no proper channels for information. So prisoners' families rely on each other to tell you that so-and-so has been transferred, or not exactly so-and-so has been transferred, but there has been a big transfer in Torah prison, so check if your kids have been transferred, etc. So there's a lot, and it's actually quite touching because, you look at social media and all these quarrels between Islamists and secularists are still going on. And you think, wow, they're still there. When yesterday you were sitting with the mother of one of those Islamist kids, and we were both talking about our kids, and do they allow you to enter medicines? No, but they allow Alaa to get medicines, and maybe he can get them to, So that's a lot of solidarity. And then there's been just solidarity of people who care. Just the messages I get from all over the world, and the stuff that's really touching, which is you're walking down the street and this مثلا lorry driver does beep beep Alaa. So that kind of thing can keep you going for days. Or this young conscript who's actually a guard at the jail. And then he says, I've been following you on Facebook, bravo. And since COP, I've been getting people back telling me, people on the streets just stopping me to tell me how great Sana is. That's my youngest daughter, who made quite and I suppose also that's how we've survived, by this solidarity. And كمان by the fact that, again, we're lucky because we're high profile. So it takes it takes a real decision to hurt us. Not every stupid lieutenant can decide to hurt us. Somebody really high up has to take a decision. So it does make a difference. And because my husband was a very prominent my lawyer, and most lawyers owe him their introduction to the human rights work and to a lot of other work and so on. So I get like free legal assistance from tens of people, not just from one or two lawyers. Whatever, once Sana was being transferred from one prison to another, and they passed her by the prosecutor's office to sign something, and three lawyers, just any lawyer, we didn't know them personally, spied her and said, that's Saif's daughter, and they came with her. And then they phoned me to tell me that they'd seen Sana. So, that's, طبعا, a lot was, Saif invested a lot of his life to get there, but that's how it works.
Yeah. Kamala, it feels to me like freedoms are being rolled back across the world. And Alaa is sort of particularly prominent in the 2011 revolution. And elsewhere in the Arab world, we've seen ferocious counter-revolutions. Tunisia is now gripped in a dictatorship again after 10 years of democracy. In Sudan, the counter-revolutionary forces are now at war with one another. How important is Alaa's story to show the importance of democracy both abroad and here in the United Kingdom?
I think his voice is a very important voice everywhere. One of the things that struck me this time, particularly reading it, was how often, when people talk about democracy, sometimes they just talk about in terms of how a government comes into power, whether there's a ballot box or not. He talks a lot about the right of human beings to live with dignity. And I think that's such a significant part of what proper democracy should be like. And I think through the book, that's one of the things he will talk about again and again. He returns this question of, we can't just fight against something. What are we fighting for? What is a common vision? What is the goal? And I think that is a reminder, even in countries where you might think, well, yeah, we've got problems, but we've got democracy. And then in Britain, we might stop and say, how many people in this country do not live with dignity? In the session I was doing earlier, we brought up the fact that the number is 4 million children don't have enough to eat. So there's no dignity. To me, that means this is not a properly functioning democracy. And I think the book is so useful at making you go back and look at what do you mean by this word. It's not just about how the government, that is just a very tiny fact. It's a significant factor. I've lived under dictatorships. But it's not enough. You don't become a functioning democracy because someone voted you into power. It's what are the rights being given to people who live here? And what are the rights of the most vulnerable, which over here, it's children, refugees. You might, in many cases, and I don't say this lightly, you might as well be living in a dictatorship, the things you have to endure here as a refugee. If you are wanting to protest, if we wanted to protest the fact that Alaa, who's a British citizen, is still sitting in a government, in a prison in Cairo, we would have to think about the laws recently passed about protests and what is now okay and what the huge amount of discretion the police have in deciding who they can arrest and for what reasons. There's so much that's incredibly problematic. And I think this book really forces you to contend with it. He doesn't want anyone to be comfortable. No one is going to read this book and feel comfortable because Alaa will ask you to look at your own country and does it meet these quite basic requirements of what a democracy is. And I think that is invaluable, really. This question of what is it you're fighting for? What is it that you want this world to look like? Not just against. You can't just keep fighting against. I think there's a lot of fighting against going on in the world right now.
Yeah, I also think that when you read this book, you're sensitized to authoritarian discourse. Because even in democracies, authoritarian, just yesterday, the French minister, interior minister, or whatever he's called, the minister responsible for the police, made a statement, the Republic will win. My God, the Republic will win against angry teenagers? What is this? What is the Republic? It's exactly the kind of statement that you expect to get from an Egyptian interior minister. Okay, and this kind of thing is seeping all the time into the discourse of politicians in democracies, of mainstream politicians in democracies.
Yeah. Speaking of fighting, last year, COP27, your family did a fantastic job of just grabbing people's attention and saying, look at Alaa, and he was on hunger strike, and he was in serious, serious danger. And it seemed like people started taking notice, in Downing Street and, in other world capitals. What happened next?
What happened is that the Egyptian regime dug its toes in, and all these world leaders who had been pushing, once the conference was over, they stopped pushing. And Alaa almost died, so he broke his hunger strike. So, the tension relaxed. Certainly, it wasn't completely useless because, a lot of stuff in jail. Since that point, the jail administration has been trying to do anything that Alaa wants except release him or allow him to visit not behind glass barriers. But all the stuff like they don't even anymore. Let me tell you this because it can lighten the mood a bit. When I go to visit Alaa or to take him stuff, they photograph every single item that I take him. Every boxer, every long john, every rice pudding, whatever. And they send it to National Security to clear it. And I wait for hours until it's cleared, and then they take the stuff in. It's normal to photograph the books or the letters, but absolutely everything. It takes time. And the guy who does this is a senior officer. I don't know what he's thinking when he's doing this. I really don't know what he's feeling or thinking when he's doing it. He's a senior officer. And he's very courteous. He says, please sit down, Dr. Laila. This is going to take a long time. So since since Alaa started eating again, since his health broke down and so on, they almost don't object to anything. They still photograph the stuff. They still do all this stupidity. But aside from the two things that they've always refused, the radio and the newspapers, they almost don't object to anything. Everything gets in. They just don't want another, escalation like that. So it does have an effect. It's just not at all the required effect, not enough. And it's not even hard. You'd think, okay, the British government has not managed to make them release Alaa. You'd think at least the British government would manage to make them give him a consular visit. The British government has been asking for a consular visit now for a year and a half, and it has not been granted. And the Egyptian government is claiming that that by Egyptian law, Alaa is not really binational because he should have filled in some paperwork or stuff like that. This is a lie, because when Sanaa was in jail, that's Alaa's sister, who is binational in the same way that Alaa is binational, because they are my children, and I was born here when my mother was doing her PhD in '56. And at that time, you got nationality by birth. So, Sanaa got a consular visit, but suddenly Alaa is not binational. And anyway, it should not be up to the Egyptian government to decide who is a British national and who isn't. It should be up to British law, actually, not even to the British government. The British government let them get away with this. But still, we gain, when I talk to other prisoners' mothers, when I look at all we did, I'm furious that we didn't get Alaa released or we didn't get a consular visit. But when I talk to other prisoners' mothers, I feel that we came a very long way because, again, as I said, there are prisoners who have not been able to even write a letter to their mothers for the past 7 or 8 years. And they weren't even activists like Alaa. And for example, Anas el-Biltagi, he's been in prison. He's el-Biltagi's son. El-Biltagi is an important Islamist. But his son was 19 and he was not active. And he's been in prison since 2013. He has not had visits. He's been in solitary since 2013. He has not had visits since 2013. We would not know what was happening to him except that he has been going from time to time before judges just to be, because he's been on remand. He has not been sentenced since 2013. So, he appears before a judge every 45 days. And so some lawyer gets, to get some news of him every 40. That's the only way we get news of Anas.
Thank you. So we now have 15 minutes.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, please do.
Well,
50 minutes for questions.
I imagine the question people in the audience have, which is how long is the sentence that he...
Alaa's sentence is 5 years for disseminating false news or whatever it is that they sentenced them for. And we're having... the prosecutor's office insists on not counting the 2 years he passed in remand because they are claiming that this was for another case which has not been brought to trial. So they are claiming that he should be released in 27. And we are claiming that he shouldn't be in jail at all, but if he is in jail, he should be released next year. So that's... all our answers are complicated. We can never give a straight answer to anything.
Doesn't help that the charges are spurious. Does anybody have any questions from the audience?
Maybe we can have lights
Yeah,
up on the grid.
Yeah, we can see them.
Possible.
There's always good doing that. Any kind of solidarity makes a lot of difference to all prisoners. And in Alaa's case, because we do give him updates on whatever kind, even if, the cards are not delivered, nothing is delivered, but we tell him about it. And there's even more good when people send, birthday cards, care of the British Foreign Minister. that was a wonderful idea. And actually, since Amnesty has a stand tomorrow in front of the Foreign Office because on the occasion of 10 years from the coup, and we're going to be there with Amnesty UK outside the Foreign Office at 12 tomorrow noon.
أهلا دكتورة ليلى.
And
My question is, so I feel like in the past, we used to think, so I've lived abroad, we used to think that like the British Embassy or the British Consulate held power to like help you out if you got in trouble with the country that you were living in or if you were put in prison. But do you think now, having gone through what you've gone through with your son, that the British government actually hold very little power in getting political prisoners out of prison?
I don't know if it's, they certainly are not getting political prisoners out of prison. Now, is it because they hold very little power or because they are reluctant to use what power they have? That is a question which we keep asking the British government. I'm not sure it's because they have very little power. I think they have more power than they're using.
Could I ask Camilla to reflect a little more on democracy in the UK? It's not that we see turbulent moments or cliff edges, but we do see, I think, in a number of different ways, and you've touched on a couple, in which institutional structures are weakened and almost imperceptibly, over time, we find ourselves in a slightly different place. How do you feel about that, and what is an appropriate response to that?
Well, I don't even think it's imperceptibly over time. I think it's been quite rapid. I mean, there's certainly that moment sort of post 7/7, 9/11, when democracies around the world rolled back civil liberties so fast. And I remember, and this is sort of to a point you made earlier, there was this line which I recognize as being so deeply the line of a military government or a dictatorship, which was there is a trade-off between civil liberties and security. There is not, but it is the line that is, when a government starts using that line, watch out. So this has been going on for a long time, and I think that something very deeply damaging happened here around all the anti-terror laws. And again, they were primarily, let's be frank about this, they were primarily being used against British Muslims. So other people were not that fussed about it, possibly. And that was the real problem, is that was the moment when people should have been taken to the streets, because it wasn't a tiny thing, it wasn't imperceptible, it was vast. And of course, some people did in groups like Amnesty, and Liberty was wonderful in all the work it did. For an organization, the tininess of its size, I mean, Liberty really is something for this country to be very grateful to. And the last few years, I mean, the thing that to me is particularly terrifying is the way the government is happy to turn on the judiciary. I mean, that I think is again, a real sign of this unwillingness to accept that you have these different branches of the government and there are checks and balances on each other, but instead, any time the judges say what you're doing is unlawful, for the government to attack them and to talk about activist lawyers, when what you have are lawyers, making a legal case. So I don't think anything's been tiny and imperceptible. But there is a kind, and I think people sort of get upset, but there is, I think underneath the upset, there's also still a feeling, but, either what can we do, which should be embarrassing when you read a book like this, because if this is what Alaa and other people are doing in situations where they're going to end up, quite likely, in Tora prison or somewhere else, then what are we doing? But I think there is at some fundamental level, I think, a belief that it won't really get that bad. That democracy is still robust enough. Just grit your teeth till the next election. And I don't think that's the correct response.
it won't really get that bad is really a trap you should not fall into. It gets that bad. It gets that bad. We used to say, okay, we started from a much worse place. But again, we used to say it won't really get that bad. We'd look at Saddam Hussein, and we say in Egypt it won't really get that bad. And then it got that bad, and it always gets that bad if you do not stop it early enough.
Gentleman in the right.
Thank you. I'm Egyptian, so sorry, it's overwhelming for me, and I take it, first of all, what we are fighting for is, as you said, we used to say in the revolution, people used to say, it's bread, freedom, justice, and human dignity. And this is what Alaa is defending. I want to clarify that for the second time he went to the prison, it was because he shared a post about the ill treatment and the torture that happened in prison, and he have witnessed it. And still, the regime accused him of false. So even for his struggle, it wasn't only for him, it was for people he have seen firsthand and how they are mistreated. The conditions there are horrible on so many levels. And again, democracy is so fragile. And the first thing for British people to do, if they want to stop the crisis and on climate and on immigration, as in Alaa book, is to defend their democracy. And my question is to Dr. Layla, I'm not a British citizen, but what a British citizen can do to stand for Alaa and move the government here, the British government, to do something to release him. This is his release is not only for him individually, although it's important enough, he suffered, he paid enough, but also as a hope for thousands of people in prison and millions of people in Egypt under this. I'm sorry to talk too much.
Well, in the short term, you just do British people do what they've been doing, but more of it, like, letters to their MPs and this is what you do specifically for Alaa. But there's something wider than that needs to be done. And it's not just British people, it's all the people in democracies. Most governments in democracies are not really accountable for foreign policy. You have to make them accountable for foreign policy, not just for us, but for you, because this is a vicious circle. I mean, these guys are telling you stuff like, if we topple Sisi, we're going to have, millions of immigrants flooding Europe. Fine, great, thank you. Sisi is impoverishing millions of people. So you're going to have millions of immigrants flooding Europe. And your governments know that. They know that it's not about that. They know that it's about stuff like, buying a useless submarine and making money for it. That's the trouble. We have these governments are making deals together for the good of a very few people here and a very few people there, buying weapons or making energy deals or whatever, and we all need to stand against them. We all need, and a lot of this is happening in foreign policy, not in domestic policy. I mean, it's hidden in foreign policy. So you really need to make your governments account. First, you need to sort of, and that's probably one of the good things about this book, that it does this a bit, but it can't really be done properly except by people actually living here and doing investigative journalism here and so on. You really need to see the connections and who's paying who what and who's making money out of what and so on. And you need to make these governments accountable for everything that they do, whether it's foreign or domestic.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your question. I think it's time to wrap up. I'd just like to say that, Layla, you will be demonstrating outside the Foreign Office tomorrow in London.
Yeah.
And it's the occasion of the 10th anniversary of Sisi's military coup in Egypt. So if anybody would like to be in London, the Foreign Office tomorrow.
And can we do a plug for the book?
Yeah, definitely.
It's an astonishing book, and really, I think, and this is another response to your question, it really helps clarify your way of thinking about the world we're living in, whether it's Britain, Egypt, tech, the interconnectedness of things. So I'm not saying read it because, here's someone suffering and we must read and feel. Read it because it's going to be good for you. And it is beautifully written. It's often very funny. It's instructive. It is, at times, visionary. And yeah, read it and buy a copy for someone else in your life you think could do with that. Yeah.
Thank you. Layla, Carmela, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the festival, please subscribe, share this episode with others, and leave a rating. Don't forget to mark your calendars as the Bradford Literature Festival returns for its 10th year from 28th of June to the 7th of July 2024.